Namaskar, and we welcome all to this January Holocaust Month commemorations organized to reignite, rekindle, and relive the pangs of exile by Panun Kashmir in collaboration with Jaipur Dialogues. In this month of January, we have been and we will be presenting Hindu Genocide Watch, a series of interactions with academicians, opinion makers, leaders, thought leaders, thinkers on themes like critical genocide studies, Hindu genocide, cultural genocide, denial of genocide, and the proposed genocide bill as part of our Kashmiri Pandit Holocaust Month campaign. We are delighted to have a special guest today, who is the Member of Parliament from Harrow East, United Kingdom, Mr. Mr. Bob Blackman. Sorry. Bob represents Harrow East since 2010 and has been subsequently re-elected in 2015 and 2017. Bob has been a long-standing champion of the British Indians. In 2011, to give voice to the causes and concerns of the Hindu community, Bob successfully launched the All-Party Parliamentary Group for British Hindus, of which he is the chairman. The British Parliament remains a platform that is often being misused by anti India lobbyists, and Bob has been a strong voice opposing this lobby within the Parliament. It will be pertinent to mention here that Bob was awarded the prestigious Padmashree by the President of India for service to assist the Indian community, making history as the first person of non Indian origin to receive this award. Sadly, the pandemic has meant that Bob is yet to receive his award in person. He is specifically concerned about the plight of exiled Kashmiri Hindus and victims of genocide living in different parts of India. He has visited exiled Kashmiri Hindus living in camps at various locations in Jammu and Delhi and has maintained a very close coordination with many community organizations and individuals. Padmashree Bob Blackman is credited with tabling early day motions in commemoration of Kashmiri Pandits Balidan Divas on 14 September in United Kingdom Parliament, and yet again yesterday itself on 19 January 2022 in support of enactment of proposed bill of Panun Kashmir on prevention and punishment of genocide, for which Panun Kashmir and entire exiled community is indebted to him. We once again wholeheartedly welcome Mr. Bob Blackman to this interaction. Welcome, Bob.
Namaskar, and thank you for inviting me to join this particular program. And as you quite rightly say, I've been steadfast in my support of the Kashmiri Pandits ever since I discovered the truth about the Exodus back in the early 1990s. So this is not something new for me. This is something that I have championed as a cause for more than 30 years.
And we are actually grateful to you for that. Actually, today we are going to discuss about the how to counter propaganda and terror and this what you call the genocides. First and foremost, there is I wanted to ask you something which I have not been able to actually ascertain. What is the reason India to India and even in Europe, mainstream parties and politicians patronizes Muslim leaders who practice communal Muslim politics and ignore Muslim leaders who want secular integration based on principle of equality?
Well, I think can I just say that I'm also the last serving member of Parliament to actually visit Srinagar, and also, as you say quite rightly, visiting the Pandits refugee camps around Jammu and indeed in Delhi and other places in India. I think the story of the Pandits has not really been fully aired across the world or indeed in the UK. The reality is that the constant position in the UK is talk of the Kashmiris as being an occupied people by India, the false propaganda, the incorrect narrative, and frankly, not learning the lessons of history is part and parcel of the problem. And in propaganda, the more a mistruth, a lie, is repeated, the more likely it is that people believe it. And I'm afraid that that's the case in the United Kingdom and around the world right now, that there is this view, and we should be quite clear. The entirety of Jammu and Kashmir are part of sovereign India, and the illegal occupation is by Pakistan of part of Jammu and Kashmir. Equally, I'm afraid for most people, they would not understand where Kashmir is on the map, or indeed when you say, well, it's not just Kashmir, it's Jammu and Kashmir, they go, sorry, what's all this about? They don't understand. And it's part and parcel of our job to communicate the message to people loud and clear, of the history of the state, the fact that on partition, the various different princely states were given the opportunity of deciding if they would opt for Pakistan or Indian partnership. And obviously Jammu and Kashmir were invaded by brigands from Pakistan, who then, and then the late Maharaja sought the assistance of the Indian Army. The brave Indian Army defended the main part of Jammu and Kashmir against the invasion. Now, there have been wars fought after that and ever since, and of course that has caused the problem. We have the longest line of control that exists anywhere in the world, with more soldiers on either side of that line of control than any other place in the world right now, and it is the longest running dispute in the United Nations. So, you know, it's not improving at the moment, and I think quite clearly the Indian government have taken really great steps to try and normalise the position in the part of Jammu and Kashmir that is still under Indian control. And I think what we've got to get across to people is the central message here is that the people of Jammu and Kashmir want security, they want peace, they want to be able to thrive commercially, they want tourists to go because it's a beautiful part of the world, and the opportunities for tourism, for commerce, for handicrafts, for canning of vegetables and export to other parts of the world. They're enormous opportunities, including, of course, hydroelectric power and other means of generating power. And so I think the first thing we have to do is counter the narrative and the propaganda that says in somehow, shape or form, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are oppressed. They're only oppressed by the terrorism that is continued from the Pakistani side of the line of control, and the encouragement by the Pakistani military for those terrorists to continue their operations. So it's quite clear that we need that. Now, the fact is that, of course, diplomats and governments from all over the world will talk to people of all different persuasions, unless and until organisations are proscribed or it's recognised that groups are terrorist groups and they should not be part of conversations. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is that the propaganda is listened to, and many people, of course, encourage and promote that propaganda in a way that's unacceptable. And as you quite rightly say, why is it that these various different groups are listened to by governments? Part and parcel of this is obviously the encouragement of certain states, and Pakistan is obviously behind promoting much of this propaganda, and the willingness of organisations across the world to listen to them. So we have to counter that. We have to get the true narrative out to people. I have said to successive Indian High Commissioners, it's very important that we counter this narrative, we get the truth out there to people, and we arm members of Parliament and those that will speak out about this with the full facts, so that they can actually speak the full facts both in Parliament, in other institutions, and counter the narrative. We have to counter the narrative in universities. We have to counter the narrative in all places where debates take place. So we need people to be on side. We need people who are Pandits, who are refugees, to speak to their representatives, be they members of Parliament, be they congressmen if it's in the United States of America, wherever they are. They need to speak to their elected representatives and make sure those elected representatives put forward their case. And we are, as you quite rightly say, commemorating the dreadful position of the attempted genocide on the Pandits back on this anniversary date, where people were faced with a simple choice: you either convert to Islam, or you leave, or you die. And the reality of that is an attempted genocide, no question whatsoever. And what we have to do is get across to the world that actually, when Hindus who had occupied the part of the Kashmir Valley for literally thousands of years, they've been forced out of their ancestral homes, that this was ethnic cleansing at best, but attempted genocide at worst. And we have to get that across, that actually the Kashmir Valley has been much poorer as a result of the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits, because they were all in positions of teaching, responsibility, running businesses. And most people that live in the Kashmir Valley want the opportunity for a better education. They want an opportunity for a better life. And right now, that has been denied them because they haven't had the mixture, the training, the experience, and of course they've experienced, unfortunately, the terrorism from the Pakistani line of control. So very importantly, we've got to get the propaganda message across about the truth of the position, rather than allowing those that would speak ill of both the Indian government and indeed the security forces, that narrative is countered. I salute the Indian government for the decision to rescind Article 370 and the various amendments to the Constitution. These were measures that were put in place on a temporary basis back where on partition, and of course they lasted for more than 70 years. Now, 70 years in terms of the valley may be a short time. To me, that's not a short time. That's 2 or 3 generations of people. So it should be absolutely right that in this day and age, that people that inherit land should be enabled to marry. I mean, if anyone proposed that women should not have property rights in the United Kingdom, for example, and they shouldn't be able to marry who they choose, and if they did, then they'd lose their property rights, we would absolutely condemn them. But that was the position in the valley. Now, of course, women can marry people from outside the valley and settle in their ancestral homes, quite rightly too. Kashmir Pandits can return, I think, in a more secure environment and help to build up the economy of the valley. All of this we have to get across to people. And we shouldn't forget the Dogra community either, because that community has been oppressed as a result of the terrorist attacks as well. And I think we need to reunite all these various different people of all religions and all backgrounds in the valley for the general prosperity of the position in the valley. And for those people that say, for example, oh, there's a Muslim majority in the Kashmir Valley. Well, there is. If you expel everyone who's a Hindu, well, don't be at all surprised when there's a majority then for another religion. We should not allow a position whereby people who've been expelled lose their rights. That's not right or reasonable. So we must defend the position of the right of the Kashmir Pandits to their ancestral home as we go forward. And clearly, the other thing that I would just gently mention, of course, is that there are more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan and Bangladesh combined. And the reality is there are many majority Muslim states in India who exist quite happily under the Indian constitution. So Jammu and Kashmir should be no different. It's not a case of religion dividing people. It's a case of being secure and being in a position whereby that people can go about their lives in an orderly fashion. And my sympathies lie with all those that have lost their lives, lost their loved ones, or been injured during security attacks by terrorists. The reality is that what we've got to do is make sure that we have a stable position so people can live their lives in peace and harmony.
Well, you were talking about your suggestions to actually the embassy in Indian embassy in UK. How effective do you think they are able to counter the propaganda, and what more could be done?
Well, I think we are building up a network of like-minded members of parliament in the UK who can put forward the case, the truth about the position. We don't want to be involved in spinning propaganda that's not true. What we want to do is, I think, make sure that the truth of the position is spelt out. And I've said to the excellent High Commissioner that we currently have, as I've said to previous occupants of the post, it's important to inform a number of MPs so that we can counter the propaganda. And the more we have countering the propaganda from the Pakistani side, the better, because then it can be seen that it's not a few. I'm very proud to be associated and a supporter of the Kashmiri Pandits, and indeed of our friendship with India. I think that's quite key. I want many others on in Parliament to be doing the same thing, so that it's not just me speaking up; it's many others, because that demonstrates the friendship that exists between the United Kingdom and India. We've just embarked, as you probably know, on trade talks, which hopefully will lead to a free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India. No one else seems to have succeeded in achieving a proper trade agreement with India, and I hope that our friendship uh, and over hundreds of years will enable us to conclude that relationship and make sure that we are in a stronger position overall. But it is important that we not only counter the narrative from the other side, but put forward the positive side. And I just this morning, I was questioning our international trade secretary, and I'm pleased to hear that the aim of the talks are that we'll reach a initial conclusion by the end of this calendar year. I mean, talks are very difficult, particularly on trade, but there is also the relationship that we have in terms of defence, security, and other forms of diplomatic cooperation that, of course, was signed by the United Kingdom and India just about a year ago. So, from that perspective, we are not only building up our trade relationship, but also building up the opportunities for young Indians to come to the UK to study, and for UK citizens to go to India and study. And so we get young people to exchange that mutual friendship and gain as a result. Equally, um, we're building up the trade, and we want to get back to a position whereby the United Kingdom is a predominant partner of India as India moves forward, and the economy in India continues to grow. We want to be an absolute key part of that decisions.
Bob, what prompted you to launch All Party Parliamentary Group, and how is it going? What is its strengths? Has it been able to achieve the objectives for which it was launched?
Well, when I entered Parliament, there are just for your listeners and viewers, there are all party parliamentary groups for everything that you can think of. Every country, every pastime, every health related matter, you name it. There's a all party group, and indeed there are all party groups for all the religions. But I was shocked that there was actually no all party group for Hindus. It almost seemed as if Hindus had been ignored. And what I set out to do and continue to do is to represent British Hindus in Parliament. I represent a broad swathe of people, not just British Hindus, but a broad swathe of people. But in particular, emphasising the fact of giving British Hindus a voice. British Hindus have been so important to the United Kingdom, both to all aspects of our public services, our economy, and indeed the contribution that is made by British Hindus is enormous. And I thank everyone who's given such brilliant service over many, many years. Um, the population of British Hindus has built up. And what I wanted to do was to make sure that their voice was heard loud and clear to government, and enable the community to come into Parliament, meet. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't been able to do this over the last couple of years. But what I wanted to make sure of is that British Hindus had a route to actually um, get their voice heard at government level, and make sure that we were trying to be as active as we could. Now we have a position whereby, under normal circumstances, we promote the various different aspects of Hinduism, be it the different festivals, be it the background. In fact, we've had the recitals of the entirety of the Bhagavad Gita in Parliament. Fantastic. I mean, to go through that. We have our annual Diwali receptions and so on, which are all part of celebrating the religion, but it's leading to a better understanding of the religion. Some things go hand in hand. Ayurveda and having traditional medicines. We have an all-party group for that, but actually understanding that there are other things that come in with this. The International Day of Yoga, for example. I regard yoga as being India's gift to the world. And now we've managed to get that incorporated within our National Health Service as a means by which people can lead a healthier life and exercise and stretch and so on, and breathe properly. I mean, some of these things are fairly straightforward, but actually need to be spelt out. Equally, we've just achieved getting a Hindu crematorium approved, which will be sited in close to the Greater London area, but on a temple site which is appropriate for the crematorium to take place. In the UK, for example, we've campaigned for this long and hard to try and get crematoria which are appropriate for Hindu needs. All of our crematoria have adapted to conduct Hindu cremations, for example, but you can't have the full service. You can't have the various different religious aspects. Now, that will now be created, I'm pleased to say, and that's something we've been pressing for a very long time indeed. So there is always opposition to these things, and we have to overcome that. We have to understand. People have to understand that religious minorities should be protected, enabled to celebrate their religions, and fit in with general society. And that's what I'm very pleased to say I've been able to do. During my time, of course, as a politician, I was leader of Brent Council when BAPS bought and developed the world famous Neasden Mandir. And equally, the Sanatan Temple on Ealing Road was developed when I was leader of Brent Council, which is obviously the local authority for those areas. I've promoted and encouraged the Hindu places of worship across the UK as far as possible. People that live in the UK who follow the Hindu religion should have the capability of attending a religious place in peace and harmony. And we continue to encourage the growth of such facilities for the benefit of people, so they don't have to travel so far. This is all about promoting a greater understanding of other people's religions and enabling people to understand that it's quite a clear way of doing things. And having been and visited Jammu, the city of temples, where I just think what a wonderful place, and we should celebrate it. But the one thing that really disappointed me when I visited there, I admit it 5 years ago now, was seeing gun emplacements on the temple, because of one of the main temples, because of the fear of terrorist attacks. That is deeply depressing. People should be able to celebrate their religion, irrespective of what that religion is, in peace and harmony, and should not be subject to threats of terrorist attacks or atrocities.
There was an attack on Indian embassy in London by propagandists that included pro-Khalistan, pro-Pakistan, and supporters of Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front is a proscribed banned organization in India, but it has an office space in the heart of London. Doesn't this raise questions on a soft approach in countering terrorism? And
Well, listen, I have no sympathy for these terrorist groups. and highlight the fact of these terrorist groups existing at every opportunity to ministers. There is a lengthy process in the United Kingdom for prescribing groups and then basically outlawing them. Uh, just to give you an example, we've just gone through a process of prescribing the entirety of Hamas, who are a terrorist group in the Middle East. That has been a long campaign over many, many years to get the entirety of that organization prescribed. We are going through a process now where we are attempting to get the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps prescribed. You're absolutely right that of course exist other terrorist groups such as the JKLF and their supporters. What we should be doing there is providing the evidence to our security services and saying once again that this group should be outlawed, should not be allowed to set up a base and not be allowed to promote their evil propaganda in the United Kingdom. That's quite clear, and I take the view of saying once again I'll be speaking out about this, but I would encourage people in the UK to complain to their members of parliament about this position, so that we can actually get a groundswell of opinion and have a campaign about this. On the issues of the attacks, and it's not just one attack. It's not just one attack on the High Commission in London. We've had a succession of these. When we had the first really serious attack on the High Commission, there was a lot of criticism, quite rightly, about our police force not taking action to protect individuals who are going to the High Commission, either for a celebration or, for example, to get visas or to deal with other issues related to activities that are properly conducted at the High Commission. Families were threatened, children were threatened. And I utterly condemn the people that were doing that. And indeed, I'm afraid there were some politicians involved, regrettably, from the UK. And I condemn them as well. The reality is there is a right to peaceful protest in this country, and I defend that absolutely. But there's no right to intimidate, threaten, or otherwise potentially physically attack people who are going about their law-abiding business. There's also, I think, the physical attacks that took place on the High Commission were utterly contemptible. And indeed, I made representations after that event to the Home Secretary, and I'm pleased that she literally read the Riot Act to the Police Commissioner in London to say, look, we expect all of our friends, their embassies, their high commissions to be protected, and absolutely defend the right to peaceful protest, but not allow these violent protests. We've had the privilege of having visits from the Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi, and there have been protests at the time. We've had the position of the Indian flag being burnt. We've had other attacks being made, and I utterly condemn those attacks. I mean, we should not be burning flags of any country whatsoever. And what we should be doing is respecting people. And once again, as I say, respecting the right to protest, but not accepting violent protest or threats against other people.
You see, now it has been established, at least here in India, we have understood one basic thing, that the jihadists, they use democracy, the rights which are actually guaranteed in a democracy, they use those rights to subvert the democracy in itself. When we talk about freedom of speech and expression, under the veil of this freedom of speech and expression, they have been able to run their propaganda campaign. And why liberal societies fail to counter propaganda campaign of the jihadists? It's fine, they do it under the veil of this right of freedom and expression, but still we are able to understand it is somehow liberal societies are not able to comprehend this. what do you think is the reason that why have we failed in countering their propaganda?
I think one of our problems is that often the jihadist propaganda
Mm,
is quite convincing for people.
mm,
We also have a position whereby, unfortunately, young
mm,
people in the United Kingdom
mm,
are literally groomed over the internet.
mm,
They're fed this message of hatred. They're fed this message of subversive activity. And unfortunately, as we know, where this can end up with the recent incidents in the United States in Texas. Um, Now, what we've got to do is counter that. I've yet to come across people who actually fully understand how young people are radicalized in this way. We all have theories, we all have ideas. Parents, I'm afraid, don't understand that their children are being literally being groomed on the internet in their bedrooms by these jihadists who use, I think, young people and fill their minds with hatred as opposed to appreciation of living together in harmony on a peaceful basis. So we have to be eternally aware. Now, we are building an international counter-terrorism operation in London. We are, I think, are cooperating fully around the world with like-minded states such as India, but obviously the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and our other friends, particularly obviously our Commonwealth friends, to counter this dreadful propaganda. Now, I would also say that I've nothing against people celebrating their religion. I mean, if people are Muslim and they celebrate their religion in peace and harmony, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and nor should there be. If people follow this religion, that is perfectly reasonable. It's when it's turned into hatred and violence against another person because of their religion that we have the problem, and that is why we've got to counter that propaganda on at every stage. And unfortunately, when we have to explain things in great detail and counter the propaganda, often people turn off and they don't understand that that's the position. I also think that our universities, schools, colleges, etc., they need to be the bastions of promoting free speech and free discussion, and not closing down people who come in to actually to air their ideas um, because some people disagree with them. One of the things I've always championed is the right for free speech. Now that doesn't mean to say that I agree with people, but I do agree that they should have their opportunity to have their say on whatever it is. Um, but what we've got to do is when we encounter lies and mistruths, then we've got to counter that with solid argument, and we have to take people on. I've always taken the view that in politics, which is a battle of ideas, as in other aspects, you have to win the argument. And I think part and parcel of what we have to do in countering this evil propaganda is to defeat it with the truth. And I think that's something that is very important for people moving forward. Now, I think one of our problems is in the UK is that the grooming that I've just mentioned takes place from abroad. It's people from various different organisations. It's hate preachers that want to fill young people's minds with hatred, that encourage them to do things that otherwise sane, rational human beings would never do. We have to counter that. We have to counter that quite directly um, because we don't even. We're now in a position whereby these hate preachers don't even have to arrive in the United Kingdom or arrive in the country where they're putting their evil thoughts forward. They can do so online, and that's why we've got to be vigilant on who these people are and prevent them from filling people's minds with the evil that they do. And if this exists, then we have to counter it as well by making sure that people hear the balanced picture and the counter arguments rather than allowing these things to go unchallenged.
What is your assessment about the alliance between left and Islamists, and how has it succeeded in capitalist societies?
I genuinely don't know. I mean, I think the reality is that the left in politics, particularly in the UK, but I think probably in other countries as well, have almost embraced. Um, it's probably unfair to say they've embraced jihadists. I think what they've done is certainly in the United Kingdom, there are a large number of politicians on the left who are of Muslim extraction. There are fewer on the right from the Islamic population, um, and that's quite wrong. I mean, that imbalance shouldn't be there, but it does mean that we have to counter that. And I take a very strong view that what tends to happen then is that where the Islamic groups join the left, they then push the left in politics towards particular causes, and then it becomes a left-wing cause as opposed to the Islamic cause to start with. Where we are on the right of politics, centre and right of politics, I think has to be all embracing. We have to bring people in of all religions. But we particularly have to counter this propaganda from the jihadists and from the left. And I think by promoting freedom of expression, freedom of thought, maximum possible liberty under the law, free trade, and the opportunity to be the best you can be on your own merits are all aspects. I mean, looking after people who are in terrible troubles, equally looking after the extended family, and I could go on about the various different aspects that on the right of politics we embrace, and they are natural Hindu characteristics. So it is naturally true that certainly in Britain, and I think across the world, Hindus should be looking at um, the centre right parties who promote the same ideals as the religious ideals of people of the Hindu religion. I mean, I passionately believe that, but respect people that don't. You know, that's reality. People may have a different view on these things, but I think what we have to do is demonstrate the fact that we're on people's side, um, that we are promoting the position of maximum possible liberty and achieving the best you can achieve. And that is why I think in many ways, in Britain, certainly, it used to be that many British Hindus would traditionally vote for the Labour Party and be on the left. That I think there's been a sea change, and more are recognising that actually the centre right of politics is where people should be orientating themselves because it's in their own interest and actually it's in the interest of the general population.
Uh, Now, since we are actually commemorating, Holocaust month, so genocide and
Yes.
related topics are very important. How has this genocide law translated into UK domestic law, and what are the lessons that can be learned by India in pushing genocidal crimes, as also
Well, I think,
protect?
yeah, I think we have to cooperate fully with India on combating terrorism. We've got to be clear that terrorists are not welcome. Um, People that preach for terrorism, preach for jihad, are not welcome. Because if you're preaching violence against someone else, you should not be welcome either in India or in the UK. And we have to combat those that promote this sort of thinking. Um, we are, of course, as you say, commemorating the Kashmir Pandits
Holocaust.
exodus and genocide from 30 years ago this month. And we have to be thinking about how do we prevent that happening again? How do we redress the balance? And how do we make sure that the voice of Kashmiri Pandits is heard loud and clear? Now, in the UK, we have obviously on the next week we will commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day, which of course is um, basically and essentially about the Holocaust under the Nazi regime in Germany and Eastern Europe in particular during the Second World War. But it's not just about the Holocaust, it's all about other genocides that have taken place, and we can go through them. The genocide of the Kashmiri Pandits is one of those elements, and I hope that we can make sure that as we commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day, that we can remember also the Kashmiri Pandits who sadly lost their lives during that terrible experience, as I say, more than 30 years ago. We need to make sure that's kept alive because people need to have the opportunity of commemorating what happened to their parents or their loved ones, and ensure that the matter is not glossed over or forgotten about, which is one of the risks of history, that as people, I'm afraid, get older and maybe memories fade, that actually we keep those memories alive. And of course, we have been able to document many of the testimonies of people who were forced out of the valley, literally at gunpoint, and of course who lost relatives as a result of the genocide. So this is a very important aspect of making sure that memory is kept alive, and we counter, as I say, the insidious propaganda from the other side.
When we have been talking about Kashmiri Hindu genocides. There are other persecuted minorities also, like Sindhis, Balochis, Hazaras, Shias, and other communities who have been subject to ethnic cleansing and genocide. So, what parallels may be drawn from these genocides and ethnic cleansings?
Well, I think once again, it's hatred of one set of people against another for almost unaccountable reasons. Just because you're a different religion should not mean that you be forced out of your home, and that is precisely what happened in the valley. Unfortunately, I've had the opportunity of visiting other parts of the world where this has happened. We are debating in the Parliament in the UK at the moment the plight of the Uyghur Muslims in China, where they have been treated in a fashion which we have now confirmed is a genocide. So this is not all one-sided, and I think we need to be clear on that score. But it is the principle, it's the numbers of people, it's the attempts to literally remove a religion from an area, which is exactly what happened in the Kashmir Valley. So it's not sheer numbers, because when we commemorate the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, we're talking about 6 million Jews. We're not talking about that number of people, but it's in comparison to the population that we should be looking at, and indeed what the impact is as a result of what has happened. There are all sorts of claims made about genocide and different genocides across the world. I mean, I think one of the things we do need to do is get this legally qualified as genocide in the Kashmir Valley, so that we can call it out for what it is. And as you quite rightly say, in Balochistan and the various different sections of the illegal occupation by Pakistan of Jammu and Kashmir, then there are terrible things that have been done to the Sindhi population, for example, as you say, and we need to call that out as well. But the problem slightly is that people don't see the big picture. And when you talk to most people, and you say they think of Kashmir as being this massive area. Well, actually, the Kashmir Valley is relatively small, as we know, and pales into insignificance against some of the other parts of Jammu and Kashmir. And so from that, and also the fact that there are mixed religions there, be they Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, all sorts of religions, and of course Buddhists as well. So from that perspective, people need to understand this, and they don't. I mean, this is one of the difficulties I have in explaining this to people. That it's not a simple thing. This is quite complex, and if you're in a simplistic argument, we've had this simplistic argument with the Khalistanis, that they think they want a particular homeland. Do they mean that they want to move away from India? And do they think Pakistan's going to give up part of the Punjab for them to have this Khalistan? it's not going to happen. And so and it's also foolish. I mean, it doesn't do anyone any good at all. And having visited the border between India and Pakistan in the Punjab, I've seen at first hand um, the position that takes place there, where actually people mix and mingle either side of the border quite happily, and it's really much more of a pageant than anything else in terms of the border there. There's a massive difference, obviously, along the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir, where there is this infiltration on a regular basis and in promotion and encouragement of terrorism, and that's what we've got to stop. Because without that stopping, I'm afraid people are going to be very wary about returning to Valley, understandably, because they fear for their security.
But when we talk about the ethnic cleansing and genocides, or about the persecuted minority communities, whether Sindhis, Balochis, Hazaras, or any other, one thing is very common: they are persecuted by Sunni radicals. And I repeat my question once again: what is the reason India, to European mainstream parties patronize Muslim leaders who actually practice a communal Muslim politics, but they ignore Muslim leaders who want actually secular integration based on principle of equality?
Yeah, well, I think obviously it's completely wrong that you
Hmm.
ignore particularly politicians who want secular neutrality and bring people together. I mean, that to me is absolutely the right way of operating. One of the other things that I look after in terms of all party groups, I look after the all party group for Azerbaijan. Now, Azerbaijan is an Islamic state, but
Hmm.
all religions are not only tolerated, but they're promoted. And so you can do these things without being exclusive. I mean, I think it's totally wrong to exclude people from being able to celebrate their religion. And that's part and parcel of, I think, the changes that we need to make. Now, in terms of politicians cozying up to jihadists and the such like, I think you've got to be very careful who you mix and mingle with in that respect, and what you promote as a result. Um, from just the UK's perspective, we have dreadful problems in trying to deal with Iran. We want Iran to be returned to being a free democratic country where people have their restored rights. We seem to have gone backwards in Afghanistan by allowing the Taliban to take over once again, and we seem to be in a position whereby Pakistan, as I've said, continues to tolerate the presence of terrorists and seems to be almost promoting um, terrorism, certainly into India, but also and beyond. And I think this is one of the areas that we've got to call out the leaders of those countries and make sure that they are not gaining as a result of their insidious propaganda.
Well, how can we cooperate between ourselves as citizenry to counter this menace of jihad and jihadists?
I think possibly um, one of the suggestions that has been made is that we bring people together who have been um, victims of this. I mean, one of the things that I was pleased to be able to do was to bring together, for example, when we talk about Jammu and Kashmir, uh, the bringing together the Dogra community and the Pandit community, um, who historically maybe have not been necessarily the closest of friends. However, by bringing them together and getting people to understand that actually cooperation means that they will all be better off is a start. And maybe what we need to do is bring together victims of jihadism and this type of activity in an alliance so that we can formulate a way of combating the jihadists. Because, um, we've had the occupation by the United States and the UK of Afghanistan. Before us, the Russians were there. Things have gone on in these areas to try and counter terrorism. But in the end, the terrain is such that it's very difficult to control and it's very difficult to completely eradicate the terrorists. We found that in Syria, and Yemen, where literally wars are still going on, in Lebanon, and we move around these various different areas, and in all of them, as you quite rightly say, what we have is the form of terrorist attacks and this alliance of terrorists that want to create literally a one-party state, or one religious basis of the state on a wide basis, to the exclusion of all other religions. That can't be allowed to uh, continue when we have various different countries in the world now and India operates obviously on a secular basis, and we should keep saying that India operates on a secular basis where people are free to celebrate their religions. That also means that when minorities in India are threatened, that we need to call out to our friends and say, look, you need to protect these religious minorities as well, and that's where we need to continue.
So, can you make us understand what genocide laws exist in UK and how are they related to domestic laws there?
Well, the position in terms of genocide is that there's an international definition of genocide, and then when a particular problem takes place, for it to be classified as genocide has to meet those international legal tests. Now, in the UK, we've had various attempts to declare particular events or particular campaigns as genocide, um, and relatively few have been agreed as being on that basis. And so, therefore, there is a process to be gone through, and for justification and explanation. That's on an international basis. The UK has resisted in many ways adding genocides to the list of genocides, which makes it quite a high hurdle for it to be classified as genocide. I think one of the risks is that, unfortunately, civil wars exist in a number of countries, and they do today. That if you make it too easy to classify something as genocide, then all these various different civil wars will end up being called genocides, and then that it devalues the concept. So I think from that perspective, have we got the hurdles right in the UK? I would argue not quite. We need to be more able to define attempts by one group or another to wipe out another group as genocide, or at least attempted genocide. Because without doing that, then we need to, we're not going to actually succeed in calling this out for what it is. Now, clearly, in parts of Europe, that's happened in the former Yugoslavia and the various different states that now make up the former Yugoslavia. We had the dreadful civil wars and attempted ethnic cleansing and genocide in those areas. The same is true I think, for the Kashmiri Pandits. We need to call that out for what it was, attempted genocide. And although, obviously, the good news is that when people fled the valley, not all of them were killed. Some were killed. But they're still in refugee camps now, 30 years later. That can't be right either. We need to enable those people to return in safety and be assured that they will be able to live their lives in the Kashmir Valley as their ancestors had done over many hundreds of years.
So, we are actually very grateful to you that you actually have tabled this early day motion in UK Parliament, wherein you have recommended and advised Government of India to enact the legislation against the genocide, that proposed bill, which is a proposed bill by Panun Kashmir about the genocide and prevention and punishment of genocide. So, what would be your message to your counterparts in Indian Parliament for this bill?
Well, obviously, it's not for UK politicians to interfere in the sovereign matters of India. As I say, I count myself as a friend of India, a constructive supporter of the Indian government, and to all my friends in India, my message would be: please lobby your members of parliament in India to encourage the government to press ahead with this particular bill, recognising genocide for what it is, and then taking appropriate action from it. It does mean that people who are victims can be compensated. It does mean that people that perpetrated the genocide can be pursued and punished. It is a matter for India to do this, but I think we need to encourage India in our reaching out and encouraging India to take this on, because without it, justice for the Kashmiri Pandits and others is being denied, and it's been delayed for far too long, and it's been delayed so long that we need to encourage and promote a position whereby this is called out for what it is and put it right.
Thank you so much, Bob, for what all you have been doing for us, for being friend of India, for being friend of Hindus, and for being friend of Hindus of Kashmir, and also for you for the manner in which you have actually connected Indian diaspora with UK politics. Thank you so much for that also, and namaskar.
Namaskar, pleasure.